it's quite clear that the Americans are trying to play nice with the Ukrainians, but they're not making any meaningful concessions. And they're working with the Ukrainians to see if they can get this whole peace process moving forward. And then today we had this very interesting announcement from Putin about the ceasefire, which is very interesting because he effectively says that he accepts the idea of a ceasefire in principle, but then he notes that there will be some very significant obstacles that basically mean that in practice it will never work, or if it does work, it'll take a long time to implement. And who knows what happens in the meantime. But things are moving very rapidly, but I'm not sure we're any closer to a meaningful settlement of this conflict today than we were 2 weeks ago. As you say, the Russians have basically beaten the sanctions. There are all sorts of people who will say that at the end of this year, the sanctions will finally kick in and bring the Russians to their knees. But they've been saying this for the past 2 years. So it's hard to believe that that's true. The fact is the sanctions have not worked. And it is important to emphasize that Secretary Rubio did not, in this instance, threaten more sanctions. I think what he's interested in doing is seeing if the Americans can work with the Russians to make this ceasefire work and then get the peace process on its way.
Here's President Putin. It's a long statement, but we've edited it down to a little under 2 minutes, commenting on the ceasefire. Now, nothing's been reduced to writing as far as we know. The communications to the Russians, as far as we know, have been public communications, which we've all seen, like this one. And you'll chuckle, I think, at the lower third saying Putin accepts ceasefire, but I'd like your thoughts on it. Chris, cut number 16. Is the United States a true neutral mediator here? Because in my view, and I suspect in yours, the U.S. is a co-belligerent, which started, promoted, provoked, and financed the war against Russia.
Yeah, there's no question. The United States and Ukraine, or more generally, the West and Ukraine, are at war against Russia. The idea that we're a third party or a mediator is not a serious argument.
And it's clear that President Putin is not interested in giving the Ukrainians 30 days in which to regroup. One would think Secretary Rubio, an inexperienced diplomat, but a person familiar with American foreign policy and the intelligence community from his years in the Senate on the Senate Intel Committee, would know that.
I think that Secretary Rubio knows what's going on here. He's not a fool. And I don't think that President Trump is fooled by what's going on here. Look, the fact is that Putin is in the driver's seat because the Ukrainians are losing on the battlefield and we have no way of rescuing the situation. So it's in Putin's interest to present an image of a reasonable statesman who talks in very judicious terms and wants to do everything he can to facilitate peace and go along with some sort of ceasefire if we work out the terms, while at the same time playing hardball. He'd be a fool not to play hardball, but he wants to have the velvet glove over the mailed fist. And this is exactly what's going on. So
the U.S. has no veiled fist, does it? The U.S. has no leverage with Russia.
No, my point is he has the mailed fist and he's putting the velvet glove over the mailed fist. This is what you see when you listen to Putin talk. He goes out of his way to sound reasonable, and he'd be foolish.
Okay, I misunderstood you. I thought you said Senator Rubio has the velvet glove over the mailed fist.
No.
You're saying President Putin does. Fully understood and totally accepted. But Rubio has no cards to play.
That's correct. We have no cards to play. We lost the war. Remember, as you said, we are a co-belligerent in this war, and we lost the war, or we are losing the war. All you have to do is look at what's happening in Kursk. We are in trouble.
When I was with Foreign Minister Lavrov on Monday, off the record, afterwards, in small talk with him, I said, what are the chances of you people agreeing to a ceasefire? And he said, why would we do that? And he's right. They're close to a triumph, at least in terms of the territory that they seek, are they not?
Yes, but the smart thing for them to do, and this is what they're doing, is saying they accept the idea of a ceasefire in principle. And then they're telling us, this is what Putin was doing, what all the obstacles are to actually putting that ceasefire into effect. And it becomes clear after listening to him talk, and he wasn't even raising all the obstacles that are out there, that you're not going to get a meaningful ceasefire unless the Russians are doing so well in terms of executing the war that a ceasefire makes sense for them. That may be the case somewhere down the road, but at this point in time, it does not make sense for the Russians to agree to a ceasefire, and they're not agreeing to a ceasefire. They're agreeing to it only in principle.
If we agree that President Putin's conditions are total neutrality, no NATO, no military, territorial integrity for the Russian speaking peoples, Ukraine is never going to agree to this voluntarily, are they?
It's hard to imagine. It really is. I mean, you may get the Europeans to go along. That'll be tough. But getting the Ukrainians to accept the permanent loss of a significant slice of their territory and agreeing to demilitarize and exist without security guarantees.
Wow.
It's hard
Well,
to.
I forgot one more condition that he is insisting upon: elections, because in their view, I realize that Ukraine is the interpreter of its own constitution, not Russia. But in the Russian view, President Zelensky is illegitimate and either needs to be reelected or replaced by someone who is elected.
I understand that argument, but I don't think in the end it makes any difference, because it's not like you're going to get someone in office, someone to replace Zelensky who's interested in accepting Russia's terms.